Hi, my name is Matt, and I'm a second-year medical student, and I'm going to try and tackle the sort of neurocircuitry of the striatal motor cortex, which is a large component of the basal ganglia. You see these in a lot of neuro classes. They use it to talk about Parkinsons and Huntingtons, and we will too later. But whenever I see that diagram with all those arrows, it's really confusing, and it just, my mind shuts down, doesn't want to look at it. And there is one in first aid, and so I'm presuming we do have to know this for boards. So I tried to come up with a way to sort of explain it from a logical point of view that builds it slowly from scratch, so that you can see why it's organized the way that it is, and that if it was organized differently, it wouldn't quite work as well. So even though you might think it'd be more direct and simpler, and we'll point that out as we go along. So to begin, I'm just going to introduce sort of the characters here in this that'll be coming up. So we've got the thalamus, the subthalamic nucleus, the lentiform nucleus, which consists of the putamen, the globus pallidus externum and globus pallidus internum, and then the subthalamic substantia nigra and the caudate nucleus. So I drew the guys that are in green are because they only send out a positive signal. That does not mean that it's going to lead to movement, but they're sending out a positive signal. And all the guys in red are sending out negative signals, and that doesn't mean that they're going to stop all movement just because they're sending out negative signals, and we're going to get into that. But that's the only thing that they can do. And so to give you some background on these characters before we start linking them together, the thalamus is our main mover guy, right? This whole circuit is just to say, do we get to move? Do we not get to move? And if any of you are fans of The Clash, they have that song "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" You may want to play that later to help bring this all together. But that's the point of all this. So the thalamus is where it's the final guy that says, yes, you can go, you can move, and everybody else has an interplay to say whether or not you do or do not. Now, the thalamus has a jealous sibling in the subthalamic nucleus. It's subthalamic, it's below the thalamus, it's jealous. It says, I don't get it, I got positive signals, why can't I do the movement? So he's going to try and work against the thalamus because he's jealous. Also, you could think of the subthalamic nucleus as the shady thalamic nucleus. And why is it shady? Because it doesn't directly go after the thalamus. It's going to use an indirect, a third party. And so, it's like one of those, multinationals, setting up some sort of shell organization to promote a cause. Not trying to get too political here, but if that's how you want to think about it. So anyway, so he's trying to get back at the thalamus, and he's going to do it indirectly. And the lentiform nucleus that has those three bodies in it, these guys are kind of all bullies with each other. They're all trying to inhibit their neighbor. So the putamen's trying to inhibit the globus pallidus externum, and the globus pallidus externum is trying to inhibit the globus pallidus internum. So these guys are all negative. They're all bullies. They're all trying to beat up on each other. And later on, we'll introduce substantia nigra, who's going to be kind of our hero and say, no, it's time to move. And then when we get into the advanced topic of it, there's going to bring in the caudate nucleus, who's kind of the surprise villain in all of that, and who stops movement. But we're going to build it one thing at a time. So, okay, so this is going to be the characters coming into play here, and we've got the thalamus there, who's going off to move the body. We've got the lentiform nucleus, which, if you remember, I said is always trying to inhibit its neighbor. And the putamen's going after the GPE. And you say, hold on, Matt, wait, stop right there. The GPE is not hitting the GPI. It's going after the subthalamic nucleus. Right, so if conceptually, well, hold on, let's play out all the roles and then we'll talk about it. So, and then the subthalamic nucleus is doing what I said it would, right? It's the jealous guy, it's the shady guy, it's going after the thalamus, and it's doing it indirectly by just boosting the globus pallidus internum, right? So, for the globus pallidus externum to inhibit its neighbor, it blocks the subthalamic nucleus. And if we're thinking as a system, right now, this mechanism, if everyone is doing their job, the thalamus is in the end going to be inhibited, right? Because the globus pallidus internum is directly inhibiting it. It's like the main blocker. It's the executor. It's the main executor of inhibition, and the subthalamic nucleus just boosts it. The globus pallidus externum, unfortunately, is screwing all of this up by blocking the globus pallidus internum indirectly. And so we set up the putamen, which is sort of like the main regulatory blocker. So the GPI executes all of the blocking, and the putamen is sort of the focus of the regulatory mechanism, because it can shut down the GPE, which correspondingly would shut down the GPI indirectly. So this frees up the globus pallidus internum to do its job, and the GPE can't get in the way anymore because the putamen is blocking it. And you might say, well, okay, I understand that the GPE needs to be blocked, and the GPE wants to block the GPI, but why doesn't it just do it directly? And I mean, conceptually, it is it's still achieving its goal. But imagine if it were to just directly block it, then no one's keeping tabs on the subthalamic nucleus. So as we go further, and there's going to be a time where we do actually want to move, if no one's keeping tabs on the subthalamic nucleus, then it's going to just run wild, and it's going to be sending mixed messages, because maybe the GPE wants to inhibit the GPI, but the subthalamic nucleus is going to try and keep it going. So we're going to have mixed messages. Not everyone's going to be on the same page. So we need sort of this indirect step to keep track of everybody. So everyone's being regulated. The subthalamic nucleus is being regulated by the GPE, and the GPE is being regulated by the putamen, and overall, the putamen is the main regulatory blocker of movement, and the GPI is the main executor of blocking movement. So that's that. So that was not moving. That was, you're not going to move. Okay? The thalamus was being blocked by the GPI, and even though the GPE tries to block the GPI, it's kept in tabs by the putamen. So we're not moving right now. So we got to say, okay, well, how can we move? So this is where we bring in the substantia nigra, and substantia nigra has the dopamine, and this is sort of our moving guy. This is going to be the moving regulator, and so what we're going to discuss now is sort of how would you design a system based on what I just showed you to get yourself to move. So there are two ways to think about this. You could just shut down the putamen, potentially. If the putamen is the regulator, I should say, if the putamen is the regulator, then how can we work on the putamen to get going? So, and you can only work with the putamen. Now, those are the rules. You can only work with the putamen. So, so you could shut down the putamen, right? You say, well, I'll just shut it down, and that is one possibility. So let's just say we shut it down, just to reorient everybody. Thalamus, subthalamic nucleus, GPI, GPE, putamen, and I just threw in the substantia nigra there over the side. I haven't shown mechanistically yet, but just conceptually, what I'm just saying is somehow it's going to add dopamine, and then the putamen is not going to be doing anything, right? You just shut down the putamen, and you say, oh, great, so the globus pallidus externum shuts down the subthalamic nucleus, and great, but hold on, just because it shuts down the subthalamic nucleus, it's not like the GPI there doesn't have some sort of intrinsic activity, so it's still going to be able to inhibit the thalamus. Maybe not as well, but it still will. So you might get some movement, but it's not a guarantee. I mean, you wanna put in some redundancy to back up your system, so that we say when we're moving, and there's no second guessing. So you say, okay, that's not good. What if we took that putamen, and we know that it's really good at blocking? So why don't we instead of blocking the globus pallidus externum, why don't we redirect it over to the globus pallidus internum? So if it's helping also, if that's directly inhibiting the GPI, instead of working on the GPE, that should block movement, right? So instead, conceptually, what if I was able to send a signal that to the putamen with dopamine that could redirect some of that negative activity from the putamen directly on to the globus pallidus internum. And that might work because you say, okay, some of the negative influence is going through, but the putamen still has some of its native original activity there. So it's still going to just be doing what it's always did also, which was to block the GPE, which blocks the STN, which boosts the GPI. So you still have that not moving mechanism going on while you're trying to redirect some of that negative activity from the putamen onto the globus pallidus internum, right? So this is not going to move because the subthalamic nucleus is going to be around and it's going to be boosting the GPI while you're trying to inhibit it directly with the putamen. And once again, you're going to have mixed messaging. So we have, I could just shut down the putamen, but then the globus pallidus internum still has its intrinsic activity of shutting down the thalamus. And then I could try redirecting some of the activity from the putamen onto the GPI directly, but now I still have that built-in mechanism which allows the subthalamic nucleus to boost the GPI. So that would also be creating kind of mixed messaging. So how do we get everybody on the same page now that says, no, we're moving this time? So, what we need conceptually is a way to have it so that when dopamine is acting on the putamen, we shut down the putamen's inhibition of GPE, but we still allow the putamen to act directly on the globus pallidus internum. This way, we're knocking out the booster to GPI, and we're directly inhibiting the GPI, so there's no way it should be allowed to then block the thalamus and we can move. So that's the concept, and like a lot of things in body, when you've got one neurotransmitter and you need to do multiple jobs, you can just change the receptors. So that's exactly what happens, and the dopamine set up two receptors. You've got the dopamine 1 receptor, which is a positive receptor, and basically goes to this pathway that would redirect the putamen and gives it a boost. So this sort of bypass, this short circuit, this shortcut, however you want to think about it, it gets boosted by the dopamine to redirect some of that negative activity onto the globus pallidus internum. And then the dopamine 2 receptor is inhibitory, and that's where the substantia nigra is inhibiting the putamen's original activity. So it can't do what it normally would want to do, and now it can only do that shortcut, which is going to boost movement. Right? We're gonna be able to move now because the GPI is going to be boosted by the putamen will be encouraged to inhibit the GPI now and not do what it normally does, which is to prevent GPE from blocking subthalamic nucleus. So hopefully, I know that. See, now if you just looked at this from the beginning, it's going to seem like too much. But if you think back to where we started, which was here, right? That was the concept. More specifically say that this was the mechanism, right? We went from that says we're not moving, and then we just layered this on, which was to say, okay, to move, I'm going to just redirect the putamen and inhibit what it originally did. So now hopefully you kind of understand that. Everyone's job, right? We had the thalamus, that's our main moving effector. We had the GPI, which was the main blocking effector. We had the putamen, which was the main blocking regulator. And then we kind of had this substantia nigra, which is kind of like a moving regulator by influencing the putamen. And then the subthalamic nucleus was just sort of the jealous sibling that's always trying to block the thalamus and needs to be controlled, otherwise it would run wild. So, how does this all then connect back to some of those classic neurological diseases that they like to throw at you? So if we just think about the easiest one is Parkinson's. Parkinson's is basically this, right? Where we started. Parkinson's is there's no substantia nigra, so it's just this system working like it always did, and you're not moving, right? So they're slow. They're not, they have a hard time getting up to initiate movement and stuff. This doesn't necessarily account for the pill rolling movement, but in general, their overall movement is slow, and then they're slow to start because it's just sort of, it's just these guys, right? They're just doing their job. There's no dopamine, so because the substantia nigra was obliterated, so this is just running on its own, and then there's not a lot of movement. Now, to think about Huntington, I got to now kind of expand the map a bit, which I know is going to seem like a lot because we covered a lot. But just, if you can, the caudate nucleus I've added to this diagram. It's the same diagram that we just showed, but I just added the caudate nucleus over there who's going to inhibit the substantia nigra. Right? So everyone's always being regulated. So the substantia nigra is being blocked by the caudate nucleus, and it does that using GABA and acetylcholine. And actually, I'm going to stop us right here and just point out the fact that in Parkinson's, right, we can treat Parkinson's by supplementing dopamine, which is, I think, the mechanism we would all jump to right away of thinking what we could do. But if I showed you this and I said, oh, there's a system, there's a nucleus that will block our substantia nigra, regardless if we're making enough dopamine, it'll try and block it. So what if we were to try and knock that process down? And so one of the other drugs you can give for Parkinson's is a central acetylcholine inhibitor. And I know it seems counterintuitive because you say, oh, I thought acetylcholine helps muscles move, But that's really a peripheral effect when you're talking about like neuromuscular junctions and whatnot. The central effect of acetylcholine is it's just like a sister to GABA, and it's inhibitory. So if you can block acetylcholine and use a central blocker like that benztropine in first aid, they talk about parking your benz. That benztropine will block that acetylcholine, which will free up the substantia nigra to cause more movement. Now look, and staying with this diagram though. So what happens in Huntington? In Huntington, there is a atrophy of the striatum. And you say, well, what was the striatum? Striatum was what you call the caudate nucleus and the putamen when you're talking about them together. And so what happens? So in Huntington, those two nuclei will be obliterated. And what does that look like? So in Huntington, if you can imagine, it's just basically like if I took away the putamen, I took away the caudate nucleus. So, I mean, the caudate nucleus, that part's not so much really important right now because even if it could inhibit the substantia nigra somehow, there's no putamen. So any signals the substantia nigra is sending out to the putamen, it's moot. It doesn't mean anything. The putamen doesn't exist anymore to do what the substantia nigra would like it to do. And then by extension further back, what the caudate nucleus would want the substantia nigra to do. So what's left is just this even smaller circuit where the globus pallidus externum is inhibiting the subthalamic nucleus, and so that GPI is not getting a boost, but like we talked about way back when, if you left alone, the GPI still has some intrinsic activity, right? So even though left alone, the system should not cause any movement. If the GPI, under certain circumstances, fatigues in a way, runs out of neurotransmitter, right, because it's not getting boosted anymore by the subthalamic nucleus, you could imagine now that sort of sudden, jerky movement of Huntington's. Because every once in a while, a signal is going to escape to move sporadically because your GPI, kind of ran out of juice there, and it's not getting boosted anymore because the subthalamic nucleus is being inhibited because the GPE is still around, and that's not being blocked by our main blocking regulator because that main blocking regulator, that putamen, is gone. gone. It's never coming back, it's gone. So you're not able to stop the GPE anymore. And overall, you can just sort of see the GPI running on its own every once in a while, screwing up, and you got this jerky movement. And Huntington's is bilateral, so the jerky movements can be on either side. But what about the one other one they sometimes bring up, which is the subthalamic nucleus? So the subthalamic nucleus obliteration, which I may mention a lacunar stroke is the common one. So if you can imagine in that one, right, all the other players are still there. You still have caudate nucleus trying to inhibit the substantia nigra, and the substantia nigra is acting on the putamen. But the problem is, like, well, what's the point? Because even if you know, the GPE can block the subthalamic nucleus, there is no subthalamic nucleus to block anymore, right? So in the end, you just have the GPI trying to inhibit the thalamus, sort of like a Huntington. You might argue, well, the substantia nigra is still able to maybe redirect some of that putamen stuff onto the GPI, and that's true. In a situation where you're not trying to move, though, if you're not trying to move, you're not going to get any signal from the putamen to stop the GPI, because that would have come from the substantia nigra, which says let's move. But this is all in the situation when you're not moving, right? So when you're not moving, it's just, again, the GPI running on its own, trying to inhibit the thalamus, and similar to Huntington, it's like once in a while it's going to screw up. But the thing is, with lacunar strokes, that's going to be one-sided. So it should just be the contralateral side that's causing these spastic movements, and not both sides. So I know that was a lot, and this wasn't as fun as learning lysosomal storage diseases, but hopefully just the logic of it now clicks a little bit better as to why you see that split path on the substantia nigra going over to the putamen, why there is this indirect route from the globus pallidus externum to the subthalamic nucleus, and so understanding that, okay, in Huntington, the putamen and the caudate nucleus is knocked out, and without my putamen, without my main blocking regulator, that GPI is going to be running on its own, and when it's running on its own, once in a while it's going to make mistakes, and I'm going to get jerky spastic movements bilaterally because I have bilateral loss of the putamen and caudate nucleus. And in a subthalamic nucleus infarct, also the same thing as that lacunar stroke thing, it's going to be that same idea, except it's that the subthalamic nucleus isn't there anymore, and so it still leads to the concept of this GPI running on its own, and once in a while it screws up, and you've got the spastic movement, but just contralaterally. And then Parkinson's, right? No dopamine, so it's just like that initial three character act going on of the thalamus, the subthalamic nucleus, and the lentiform nucleus just doing its own thing when you're not because you don't have the substantia nigra there anymore to initiate movement. And that system, when not influenced, is set up for no movement. So Parkinson's people are really slow. So that was a lot. I was going to just briefly, since we talked about the thalamus, it's mentioned, it's the main moving regulator. One other quick topic that just can get confusing is the nuclei of the thalamus and what their job is. So just a quick rundown. You have your ventral posterior lateral nucleus, and it gets the sensation from our spinal tract. So of the extremities and trunk. So if you want to think about, like, well, VPL, it's got an L, lateral, your extremities are lateral, or you could think PL is like pain of lumbar. So at least you can remember that it's like this is a lower thing that's getting the sensation, as opposed to the VPM, ventral posterior medial, which medial, it's like the face, it does the sensory of the face, so trigeminal, and taste. So if you want to think like medial, like your head is medial to your extremities, or PM, pain of mouth. And then the lateral geniculate nucleus and medial geniculate nucleus. Lateral geniculate nucleus, you can think of. Lateral geniculate nucleus, you can think of a thalamus wearing a pair of shades, or it's looking, or L for looking, or medial geniculate nucleus. I think M for music, because this is for hearing. And then the ventrolateral, I use very lazy, and that was part of our that was part of the striatal cortex. That was the nucleus that GPI was going after. And so very lazy is like you don't want to move kind of thing, or or on those diagrams they always show, if you're like more spatially oriented, they always kind of show the lentiform nucleus kind of like in a corner, bottom corner of the thalamus, which I mean that to me is a little too. I don't think it's reliable. Like very lazy ventrolateral nucleus of the thalamus is involved with signals from the basal ganglia, and then like a neat little corollary here for the hypothalamic nuclei, just to cover one of them. There's the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus, and that controls satiety. So if you think like, oh, that's got an M in it, and VPM was like taste, so taste, satiety, thalamus, hypothalamus, and I always remember like what happens when you ablate the ventral medial nucleus of the hypothalamus. I call it the very mean nucleus, because when you ablate it, not only are you incredibly hungry, so these patients are obese, but they're very angry. So ventral medial nucleus is is the very mean nucleus. So covered a lot. Striatal motor cortex, mechanism, Parkinson's and Huntington, and Hemiballismus. Sorry, oh my God, I mentioned that whole talk. I didn't say Hemiballismus for subthalamic nucleus ablation. Well, you'll see it in first aid. But that's that. Plus just a quick rundown of the nucleus of the nuclei of the thalamus. So remember VPL, pain in the lumbar, must be the extremities and truncal sensation. VPM, pain in the mouth. It's the trigeminal, taste. Lateral geniculate nucleus for looking eyes, optic nerve, lateral geniculate nucleus. Wearing some glasses, wearing some shades. Medial geniculate nucleus, M, music, hearing, and then VL, very lazy, ventrolateral. That was where our striatal cortex was working on the thalamus. So, long video. I hope it helps, and thanks for watching. Bye.